Yep.
template, I don't remember having one either.
You don't?
I just remember being told to like think about the time you're putting for each activity, not necessarily like a template or anything.
Okay. And
Yeah,
Arturo? Hmm.
I just kind of remember because when I was doing my child development classes, they made us do like a whole week's worth of lesson plans, and I figured that was kind of hard. After that, I was like, oh well, it got easy after a while.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to talk a little bit about that is because having a template can make your life so much easier for organizing your lesson plans. And I have to tell you that I don't use them. um I don't know, I was an avid student, so I think I just got so used to, I got so turned off by templates from like the Cornell Note template that I just never liked using templates after that. But they can be really useful, and sometimes I really wish I had my lessons organized around a template, because it just means that you know exactly where you are going to find information when you're looking for it after doing a lesson plan, or to go back to a lesson plan that you've done in the past. And I didn't make you guys use one or give you ones to use, because I felt like, okay, everybody has their own system and you should use whatever system is most useful for you. But I did notice that some of you had really good ways of organizing your activity, right? Ruben, yours was the first one because I graded them in the order in which they were submitted. Yours was the first one I noticed that was really good. And then a couple of other people I saw had really good ones. And I want to show you one, just not because it was even like the best one, but how you can create your own template for a lesson plan. Um, and some of you can just go ahead and straight out like use what you had, although some of you I would like and not necessarily recommend that you use the way you organize the one you had. So I want to show you one from a classmate of yours, so from this class. And I don't think they are here right now, so I'm just going to leave their name out a little bit here. Yeah, they're not here. So this is how they organized it, and I thought this was actually quite brilliant. And many of you actually use the same method of organization. I just like the way how clean and easy to follow this was. Right, that the lesson plan title is right at the top, and then the bolding with the black. Those of you that did that really helps. It helped me grade your activity, but I think it can really help in terms of the organization of it, right? And then for the sequence of activities, just having step one, step two, step three. That's the point of the sequence of activities, by the way, is that you have it so organized that you have like steps that you take, so that when you're gonna use it, you don't have to think about how to organize it in your head. You have it already written out how it's going to be organized. The actual activity they came up with is actually a good one too, but I'm like, you don't even need to look at that. You just using this one as an example of it, right? Um and then they included like a worksheet in here, and I thought this was all just organized very very nicely. So just an idea of something that if you know you're going to teach, to have somewhere in your files a template, right? And you can't just use Google, like Derek was saying. I actually when I was thinking of what to how do you include in your activity, I put in lesson plan on Google, and I didn't even bother with this stuff. I usually just go straight to images and looked at the way different people organize theirs. So some are much more like pretty with color, and then others don't have to be, right, like simple. Like this one I just liked as well for its simplicity. So I started working on kind of creating my own lesson plan template, just using this. And I really like tables. Just recently I've really been liking tables. So I'll link this on Canvas in case anybody wants to use it. But just having something like this can be really useful, so that you don't have to think about how to organize a lesson plan, right? Like I said, it's not absolutely necessary to have one, because literally pen and paper like work just as well when you're planning for the next day or the next week. But I think it can save you a lot of time to have this. Now, some of you are not going to go into teaching, But for those of you that are going to go into graduate school, whether or not you're going into teaching, one of the things you want to think about is having a reading template. Or because one of the things, especially if you're going for a PhD and in some master's programs, what you have at the end of your master's program is either you submit a thesis or you do a kind of exam. For PhD people, it's somewhere around the end of your third year in graduate school. In the PhD program, you have to do an oral exams. So you put together a committee. You pick who is in the committee, but they sit there for a couple of hours, 2+ hours, just basically giving you questions. They just ask you questions for 2+ hours, and you have to, and it can be on anything, but usually it's on the topics that they are experts in, topics that you have been working with them on. And the best way to prepare for those kinds of exams is to, every book you read, you have notes on. So that as you're studying, preparing for that exam, you don't have to go back and reread things that you have already, things that you're going to look for. So things that you need for a reading template for graduate school are things like, what's the argument, key arguments in the book? How does it fit into the historiography? Key pieces of evidence, just things that will help you not have to reread a book. Right? That can be really useful. And let me see if I can see what comes up when I do a Google search. I haven't had to look this up in forever, but reading history exams template. Of course, I typed history in wrong. Prelims. Yeah. Okay. So yes, something like this. Oh no, let's see. That one's not very good. I'll show. Anyways, for anybody that's interested in those, I have a few in my files that I can dig up and use. I really wish I had used some sort of reading template for when I was throughout graduate school. Like every book you read in graduate school, use something where you're jotting down your notes with key elements, right? Because it means if you ever need to go back and reference a book, you're not having to reread it from scratch. You might have to reread certain sections, but you're not rereading all of it. Let's see, any questions? Let me look and see really quick if I have some of my old ones. No questions? And I'm showing you all of my my files. No, okay. I'm like, it's in here somewhere. I know I saved it. Because actually it was one that I borrowed from Dr. Cupchoy. But either way, I'm like, I highly recommend you have some templates saved in your computer somewhere in case it is useful. Well, it's not mandatory. I feel like this is useful. So that brings me to the next activity that you all have to turn in, which is going to be the big history teaching activity. So it's going to require the same elements as the media literacy activity, except I took out the assessment, method of assessment. That's the one that most people had trouble with. So I just took it out of these requirements. Right, so just note that you don't need to have a method of assessments. You can include it there if you want to, but it's not necessary. Right? So it's about creating an activity meant for a K through 12 big history classroom. Right? You can choose whatever level you would you'd want to do it, and that the main requirement is that it can fit into big history class. And as we talked about last week, big history can include pretty much anything. But a lot of the things like U.S. history don't necessarily fit into big history. It has to be some big theme that can include more than one place in the world, right? It can focus on one element, but it has to be able to be used for like different geographic locations, ideally. So let me ask you, has anybody started that one yet? That activity, the big history activity?
No.
I started reading.
Is there okay? Well, I assume that most people were not going to have that one started. So how will you start it?
Trying to decide on which threshold I want to do.
Aha, the thresholds. Yes. So actually, that is the perfect way to start, is to go back to the timeline, the framework of big history, right? Because big history can kind of be anything you want to pick, something in the timeline. How would you do that? How do you know? Where do you go to see the thresholds?
Isn't it bighistoryproject.com or
Yes.
.org?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm trying to save you some time when you sit down and actually organize plan out the activity. So I actually have a bunch of links under week 9 in the modules. And I've linked it here as the OER Big History. This will be the easiest way to get to it. Let me open it up. Okay, so most of you don't have accounts here. Oh, this already signed me in. I had thought I had signed out of this one, but so maybe let me log out and show you the process. So most of you don't have an account with these people, so create one. Has anybody gone in and created an account with them?
I tried, it didn't let me.
It didn't let you? Why didn't it let you?
I don't know. I tried my personal email and then that didn't work. And I was like, okay, let me try my work email. And that also didn't work. And I was like, okay, never mind. I won't try.
All right. Like the main thing, I think when I created an account, I told them that I was a homeschooler. What did you tell them, Maria, just out of curiosity?
I think there's an option that said educator.
Yeah.
It was like educator and student together. And I was like, okay, I'll do this one.
Okay. I'm wondering if they require that you verify educator accounts. Because I remember when I joined, I was just I had just joined as a homeschooler. Like I didn't even use my work email. I used my personal email. So I will try to figure out a way to get you a sign in here, Maria. If you can stay after class, we can figure it out. But the main reason why you want to make an account here is because it'll make your creating the activity a lot easier. Like it will just create it easier. And I want to show you things that you can use in here. Right. So Maria, like even if I have to create an account just to let you guys log in, I will create this tonight so that everybody has access to it. So of course, under teaching the course or course home, you can go in and it takes you to the thresholds. So this is what I showed you last week, right? And to make your life easier. In fact, because I want you to get used to this website, because I think it's useful not just in big history, but in teaching world history and other kinds of histories. Use stuff from here. You don't have to create a lesson plan completely from scratch again, right? You can go in here and use the videos they have, use the lesson plans that they have, right? So like if you are interested in creating something on the Big Bang, but you think you're too scared of it because you're thinking, I don't know a whole lot about the Big Bang, that's okay, right? Why is this taking forever? Oh, it's just taking forever. Okay. That's okay. Go in here and look at what they have, right? So they have like the opening. You can get some of the reasoning and objectives, learning objectives from here, but then they have activities, right? Use their PDFs, use the other videos, right? They literally have it organized for you. So the main thing I want you to do is to adapt it to fit you, right? For some of you, like your personality is just such that you're not just going to hand students like a video to watch and that's it, right? So you would adapt that to fit, within an actual activity that you would have students do, or to be part of a lecture that you would do with them. And this helps you with some of that because it has questions to go along with the video, things like that. And like reading. So like the readings you'd use, it's up to you to pick what you use from the material that's here and then how you would use it. Right? So you can literally just base your activity based on what's already on this website. Does that make sense? I don't want anybody to think that that's cheating, because that's honestly when I was um, teaching big history, I use this website a lot. Even when I didn't necessarily use all of their stuff, I was using them to reference, the threshold and the key elements of each threshold. So, and I think that that's, you should be doing some of that. But then I also wanted to show you the community tab, because I think this is one of the most useful things about their website as well, is that they have all of these discussion board posts for people who are currently teaching big history. And so let me go on here. Teaching big history. I'm going to go to this one over here, teaching big history, and see you have general discussions, and then you have people who are teaching it in the middle school level, at the high school level, homeschoolers, and then they have the special board for people who are just, this is your first time teaching it. I haven't explored the middle school board at all, but I noticed that in a lot of their boards, what people will do is they will share an activity that they're planning or an activity that they have used, and then other teachers give feedback on it, or can use it themselves. Like, let's see, moving your classroom outside during the pandemic. What does this say? Has anyone moved outside? Events at the local park. Okay, that's not super useful, but but in LA it actually might, thinking about activities that are, you could take students to the park for. But look, let's see. Big history activity for sixth graders. Let's see what's in here. Okay, and then people give the activity. And so we can click on some of these if we want, and see what they wrote. Oh, this just gives me the person. Sorry. Like I said, I haven't played with this particular part of the middle school board as much, but I saw that they have lesson plans and activities that other people have used or are thinking about doing it, that you can go in and reference, use yourselves. For this assignment, the main thing that I would ask is that you give credit, right? Tell me in the actual activity at the end of the Word file or the Google Doc file that you submit, that you tell me, where in the boards, give me a link to where in the boards you got the idea or some of the specifics for it. That's it, right? So let me go back to, not the community, but to the thresholds over here, because I want to show you how to put together an activity. Sorry if you can hear my dogs, but how to put together your activity that you will submit to me using this, right? So any preference? Does anybody want to give me a unit to go use for this demonstration? Like, this is your chance to use a unit you're interested in.
Probably somewhere in agriculture and civilization.
Agriculture and civilization. Excellent. Actually, there were some good ideas in the community board about this one, right? Because a lot of what the unit on agriculture does is teach students about like why agriculture is important, and to think about what early humans ate, right? So like this what's for dinner worksheet, let me see if they've updated it, but I know I've seen this one in the past. So it tells students, what, I'm sorry about my dogs. Tells students about what early people ate and how they ate, and it goes around the world. So it does different places like rice farming in East Asia. It does squash and corn in Mexico, Australia. So it's a reading assignment that comes with questions. But like something that one way to adapt this is for students to think about what they eat, right? What they ate today and where in the world this originally came from. right? That's a good way to talk about like kind of biodiversity and how food travels around the world, right? Like we can even do it right now. Um, so, and Brianna, yes, it's on Canvas. So what does anybody, what's the last thing you ate? Anybody want to share the last thing you ate?
I just had tostadas.
What was on your tostadas?
I mean, it's a tostada, I had frijoles and cheese.
Aha, perfect. Okay, so does anybody know? So the tostada is something that a lot of different cultures have, right? So those of you that don't know, it's like a fried tortilla essentially. It's fried and it's hard enough that you can put things on top of it and like eat it that way, right? And so that's something that different cultures have. So that's one thing that in a diverse like classroom you can ask people, all right, does you know where your family comes from, what's the equivalent of a tostada? But does anybody know where beans come from? Where how do beans get grown and how do they end up in our
Isn't it a seed? It's not a seed?
feed? It is, but aha, that's one activity to do, that you can do with students is have them look at, okay, the beans that you're buying at the grocery store, where are they grown, how are they grown, right, how are they collected, right, because it's something that most of us don't even know, right, like I think most of us would have to Google some of this, right, so let's Google beans. Especially since people don't, or a lot of people don't live in agricultural communities, right? We don't know some of this. So, yep, they grow from seeds planted, right? So, not necessarily these particular beans. Let's put something more specific. Pinto beans. Oh, there we go. Plant the pintos in well-drained, fairly fertile soil. Work in compost. Okay, we're not going to actually grow the beans, but before planting, soak the beans. All right, so there's an entire process to do that. There's videos on YouTube that we can look up to see. And most of this is probably about growing them in yourself. But we would be more interested in like, okay, um, where they come from. They're originally from Peru, so they are something that come from the Americas, right? And that is why it's a very common, very cheap food in a lot of Latin American cultures, right? In a similar way that like people around the world have the equivalent of that, right? And that's a key thing to kind of understanding why, why it's so popular in our foods, why a lot of us eat them. They're cheap, and they're easy to cook. Yeah. Would you guys agree with that about beans? I'm like, no. The other thing, cheese. Maria, do you know what kind of cheese you ate?
Um, it was mozzarella cheese.
Okay, all right, mozzarella cheese. Because cheese, there's a whole method of fermenting cheese, but it depends on what cheese you have. I'm a little disappointed you didn't use like goat cheese or something.
No, it's because the mozzarella cheese melts nicely on the hot beans, and that's why I like it.
Oh, totally get it. I'm just like goat cheese would have helped me because we could
Well,
have talked
we
about
also
goat.
had queso fresco. I don't know what that is though. I just know it's queso fresco.
Yes, so, and so that actually, so that's very similar to goat cheese. But okay, mozzarella cheese we associate with Italy, and that turns out to be its originate where it's originally from Italy, and it's made from cow's milk. Right from there, I think a lot of uh, the final product of the cheese depends on the process, right? The process of fermenting it and all of that. What are you guys saying in the chat? You all had you just had some queso fresco in your torta. Yeah, and so that's important, right? Like it's something that I find hard about living in Southern California is that, well, I have access to a lot of really good cheeses that are like from cow's milk, from goat's milk. One of the things I miss the most is European cheeses. They're particularly French cheeses. Is the French have like over 100 different kinds of cheeses, and each region in France has their own specialty. It's all a similar process. It's just slightly differences in the process that give you that final product. So you can get a very smelly cheese, or you can get a much more light cheese, things like that. All right. Anybody? What else did you all eat? Last thing you ate?
I had chicken, some chicken. Is it thighs or legs? I always get those two confused. Pinto beans, arroz rojo, and some queso Oaxaca with a tortilla de maíz,
Wow.
and uh, what's up with chile de árbol.
Ooh, okay. Then you can always try to get into the different ways in which people make their chile. Because I've noticed that, some people go more the traditional route, and now there's all these new gadgets on how to make chile. But actually, I'm going to use the fact that you ate chicken. And that might seem easy, right? That chicken comes from the chicken. It's an animal we can pinpoint to. But most of the meat that we eat does not come straight from a kind of, grab mom and pop farm, right? Where does most of our chicken come from?
Like factory farming, right? Is that
Yeah,
what it's
it's
called?
most of it is factory farming. And I don't know if any of you have looked into it, but it's ends up being a really brutal process of like growing the animals, like feeding them, force feeding them in a lot of times to grow as fat as possible, injecting hormones into the animals, and they're in really tight, like it's not even pens, it's cages, right? And really tight pens. And then it's this kind of an assembly line factory system of killing the chicken, getting the different meat out of it, and then packaging it, right? So that's one way to talk about the ethics around the food we eat, and how we can think more critically about food, where it comes from, beyond then just the slaughtering of the meat and breaking it up into its different pieces. The other issue with a lot of the meat we eat is how it's packaged. It's packaged in factories. A lot of the working conditions for workers in these meat factories are really terrible. We've had a lot of issues in these factories lately because of COVID, right? Workers work so tightly together, close together, that social distancing is not possible, and they were having really high rates of COVID infections in meat packing factories. Have any of you paid any attention to that?
I saw that. Didn't they have to throw away a bunch of meat because they were afraid it was infected or something around those lines, right?
Yeah, and they were having that was having, and then the ethics around just a lot of workers getting sick, um, and
A lot of
there
them were undocumented immigrants as well,
a lot
right?
of undocumented immigrants in these factories. Yeah, because the pace at which you have to work is really, like, it's really fast, and there's always accidents, a lot of accidents at these plants because you're having to use really sharp tools and use them really fast. Arturo?
I know that China they didn't want to accept no more from Tyson because they were afraid that it might be affected. And also, news article said that a man brought COVID to his family, and the husband died, but everybody else got COVID as well.
Yeah, that's the big thing that I was seeing too, that some of the workers have there's been a lot of injuries, a lot of COVID cases, people dying because they couldn't afford to take a day off of work, and they would going into work sick with COVID, and then the corporation wouldn't just was not helping. They're not sending workers to get health care, and they're not allowing them enough sick days so that they can take time off of work, things like that. So uh, when talking about creating an activity about food, for anybody that's really interested in kind of the ethics and the politics of food, it's a really good way of doing that. Or it's a good way of even, you don't want to focus on the negative of talking about community gardens and family gardens. Right? Did you all know that we now have actually a couple of different community gardens at Cal State LA? No, no one,
Okay.
none of you
I
have
did
taken the
not know.
class?
No.
I did
Are
not
they
know that.
virtual?
So actually, is Dr. Chatterjee has turned it into a class for graduate students, and she's having some of the graduate students snuck into campus because they got the plot and everything. But in order to actually plant it and do all of that, you do have to physically be there. You can't do it virtually. But they have started a Cal State Lake Community Garden in the site where the new dorm rooms are. It's over by the new dorm room, so you can actually go in and take a look at the community garden. But I know one of the Asian American classes also has a little community garden over on the side of King Hall.
Yeah, Dr. Fun does her food and justice class. Last semester I was in it, but because of COVID, we did our own gardens at home. All of my plants died, but I'm not very good at gardening, so maybe it was a good thing I wasn't at the garden.
But it's something that's so easily adjustable for like at home, right? Like the you don't need a lot of even like plots or a lot of like tools even to grow something at home, right?
Yeah, no, I literally, it was like near my sink, and it took up like I'd say maybe a foot of space, and it was like growing peas. I think mine were mainly peas and like spearmint, and the spearmint was like nice for like teas and stuff.
And that's actually even more elaborate. Growing herbs is one of the easiest things. I'll be honest and say that I haven't yet attempted it because I have a terrible like black thumb, and I kill everything I grow. But now I've been able to keep like 5 plants alive for over a year, so I might give growing some of these things at home a shot. But it's one way to to start talking about that with kids, even young ones, right? And getting them to do an activity, take something home that is neat, that's really neat, and will get them to think about ethical issues around growing food, about meat, and also about just what you can do for the environment, right? You have
There
some.
was
Mhm.
I was gonna say there was a really good activity we once did in one of our classes surrounding chocolate because because my econ professor said that chocolate was like the poster child of like everything wrong with like modern day like agriculture, especially in like third world countries, because of like the amount of like child slave labor that goes into it, and the intensification that chocolate has, and the cutting down of like various like natural resources. And I think like in general all these topics would be good about talking about, because like agriculture is one thing, but then you have like I think the right word is the intensification of agriculture, because at some point, right, with the like Malthusian theory, there was like this belief that we couldn't get agriculture because we didn't have enough plots of land, so there had to be a whole like kind of second part to the agricultural revolution where you kind of adjusted. And I think chocolate and factory farming are like really good examples of that.
Yeah, and then Christian, what you're saying in the chat about capitalism and imperialism are actually really great topics that you can raise and teach around some of these issues, right? Like you can take a specific food item like bananas and talk about capitalism and imperialism, right? And the way in which American companies, right, have gone into places in the Caribbean and in Latin America to control the growing and the cost of things like bananas, right? Or coffee is another great one to do that with, right? Or even, pick something like that you end up picking up in different units, right? Like you can take like coffee, for example, or not even coffee. I'll use sugar as the example. You can take the history of sugar and connect it across different thresholds because you have, one, just all right, the basics of how sugar is grown. Then you have how the Americas impact sugar production, right? That because was very easy to grow in the Americas, European powers transplanted a lot of that sugar growth into the Americas. And where was the labor for a lot of the growing of sugar coming from?
Africa.
Slavery. Yeah. They required slavery because it was such hard labor, and the plantations you could have in the Americas were so big. You could grow a lot of sugar. You needed that labor, and slavery ends up producing that labor, right? And then, as a process of decolonization comes through the Americas and of independence movements achieving independence for a lot of places, that created some chaos about how to still control those markets for the Americans and for the Europeans that still wanted access to cheap sugar. And what they developed then is an economic control of a lot of places, right? So you can go from, slavery, colonialism, to imperialism and more modern day issues that come up with, you know, uh, you know, how you grow and how you the ethics around some of these goods. Yeah, O'Neill.
Um, because I work in the grocery industry and I know how much we throw away. And I think my manager told me once that 7% of everything that we bring in is thrown away. And that's like the average number for across every chain and every like major grocery company. So I know for a fact, like a lot of the food that's grown here is just thrown away and a lot of the food that is taken to the store, for instance, like if 12 count of eggs, if one breaks, we throw 11, we throw all of them away. It's not replacing, like, it's not like, oh, you just sell the 11, you throw the whole case away. And even then, I think like you could even give information about how misleading the food manufacturers are and how okay it is to throw stuff away, because best buy dates are extremely misleading, and the fact that it's just maximum, you enjoy a maximum like taste by that date, not necessarily that you throw it away. And I think that's also something that you could inform students about, even kids, to be more aware of where their food is coming from, how much we throw away, and how farmers are okay with growing this amount of food, larger amounts of food, knowing it's going to get thrown away.
Absolutely. This became an issue. I forgot which city it is off the top of my head, but recently there was a grocery store chain that was actually stopping people from going into their trash cans after hours. From some people were going into the trash cans to pick up food that the store was throwing out, but that was still edible. And the chain was actually preventing people from going in and getting that thrown away food. And it made the news because a lot of people, like, there was an outcry over this, that we have a lot of people starving, especially since in the last year since the pandemic started, and how unethical a lot of grocery chain practices are in the
I
district.
threw away 50 cases of 12 count eggs because they didn't meet the size to be met as jumbo. Because the weight was wrong, I had to throw 50 cases of perfectly good eggs. Nothing was wrong with them. There was no outbreak of anything, and I had to throw away. That was, I mean, $150 worth of eggs, but that's enough to feed a lot of people, and I threw them away just because they didn't reach a certain weight. And that's so trivial to me that we couldn't even sell them because of, in the corporation's mind, like, oh, they can get sued for selling something that's not what it is, and we have to throw them all away. And it's okay because we're not taking the hit. The company that sold us the eggs is, and just being able to push that blame makes it okay for them.
Yeah. And you think about, well, can't they donate them? But again, it all comes to legal issues why they don't donate a lot of that food. Or you know, the excuse is a lot of legal issues and that threat of getting sued and being legally responsible for food that gets donated, because that's such a shame. It's a total just waste, right? Because it's perfectly edible food, can't be sold. But my thought is, why can't you donate it then?
I actually have something to add. In the beginning of COVID, a lot of farmers were throwing away the big mountain, I think it's still up, big mountain of potatoes and the gallons of milk because nobody was buying it. In my head, I was like, how come we can't donate it? They said that it will cost more to donate them. So they'll take a bigger loss if they donate it than actually throw it away. So it was sitting on the field.
Brianna?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just gonna mention, like, speaking to O'Neill's, like, I mean, I'm sure he has to throw away a lot of produce as well. And it's so upsetting for people to think about that when we think about, the farmers that have to grow it and that they just throw away, hundreds of pounds of produce every day. But it does like recently, and in the last probably decade, been more like upstarting companies of selling like imperfect produce to kind of um avoid that. Because like most, like I think like Vaughn's, every time I step into Vaughn's, they have perfect bell peppers, perfect apples, like shiny beautiful produce, and that's all they accept. But like a lot of recently, like more eco-conscious startup companies are trying to purchase the imperfect ones that get thrown away otherwise. And I think that's a really cool concept of like trying to save that, like basically food waste.
Yeah, and I love that actually, because it's a good way of, talking about these things without just focusing on the negatives, but also having a, okay, what do we do about this, or what are people currently working on to fix this problem, right? Because like that, for me, that tends to be important, because it's one thing to always complain about things, but that gets really depressing real quick. So I like to always have something in there like, oh, okay, what can we do about this? And that would be a great way to add to a lesson plan around food that ends on a, hey, there's things that you can do, even you as a kid or within your family, that can be done to mitigate some of these issues or some of these
Even
effects.
the solutions that they offer, like we have compostable waste.
Mm.
So even the way they do it is still fuel to make money. So the waste that we are able to compost, we put it in bins, and that waste is then sold off to be made into animal feed. So even then, they're trying to use the most efficient waste to make money. So we throw away all those perfectly good eggs, the perfectly good produce, the stuff that is fine gets sold off for cheaper and then fed to animals. Even the fat that they trim in the meat department gets sold to be made into whatever it is that they use. And it's crazy to see that even when they're wasting, they're still trying to maximize profits, even though those items are perfectly fine, but they would rather feed it to like an animal because they're going to make money off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this, by the way, so a lot of these ethical concerns are happening all over the world. So even if you didn't want to do a lesson plan focused on like the US or California, although I think this is important where we live in California, because so much, we do grow a lot here in California. But also, I'm thinking about how very similar issues come up in different parts of the world. There was a lot of farmings with issues in India in recent decades, because a lot of American companies went into India and tried to change farming methods, get them to use American farming methods and tools. And that worked for some time, but it turns out that the methods they were using to farm, that they had forced farmers to change over to, made the ground less fertile. And so while people were okay for a number of years, you then had some really bad years in which it was really hard to grow anything in some of these regions. And you had farmers that then were starving, and families that couldn't make any money. and it led to a rash of suicides of Indian farmers. So, and this kind of thing happens all over the world, in terms of, okay, the ethical issues might vary, but it happens everywhere, and a lot of us don't know about it, right? I'll be honest, a lot of us don't want to know, right? Because honestly, doing the ethical thing takes a lot of work, and it takes doing your own research. Uh, so if you are interested in some of these topics around food, it does take then informing yourself and knowing some of it, and then figuring out how to include it in your lesson plan. But it's not the only thing you can do. You can choose to not do a food activity, although now I'm thinking that I'm going to get a ton of food activities in these big history projects, which is great. I think it's fantastic because it's something that's very, I think, real for our everyday lives, right? So I think you guys were so actually so into this topic that I don't need to show you a different example, or I'm running out of time to show you a different example. But very similar things can be done with other topics in the Big History Project. Ways of connecting, taking one theme, and then connecting it across like multiple thresholds, right? Doing things like what's for dinner here, but they also do different things that you can do here. Like this is one where they do a lot of different origin stories. Let's see. They do a lot of stuff with record keeping, and this would be, I think, interesting for some of you in terms of like, okay, what are the politics and the things that go into the sources we get? How do we end up with the sources we have, and the problems and this kind of sources we end up with, which we need as historians, right? We need sources, but some people don't have their source, the things they write or the things that they record, preserved for historians, right? So this would be a good way to talk about the problem of sources, right? Um, they also have something that they call the Little Big History research questions. So it's a project that they envision that is something that students work on for a long period of time, and that's something you can build across thresholds. But it's like doing research on specific topics that fit into the thresholds. So it's students coming up with their own topic, right? And figuring out how to ask research questions, right? And they like give you these handouts to help you develop and help students develop these research projects. So that's something that you could use as well. And again, videos. Hopefully you're seeing as I go through this particular unit that they have tons of articles. So that's reading material, but also videos that can be used so that you can plan an activity where there's might be maybe a little bit of lecturing, a video, and then something else that gets done, um, so that there's different kinds of um, uh, learning going on, right? So you can see anyway some of these little things, working with artifacts, things like that. If you're interested, time, like the issue of time and how our notion of time change is an interesting one that they have in here. So there's lots of this kind of thing. And I know most of you will probably want to stick to like the threshold on agriculture until now. But like I said, I think the benefit of a website like this is that, hey, if you're actually interested in some of these other things, they have material for you to work with, where you don't have to do all of the background research now on this. So I highly recommend that you use the Big History website, right, to build your own activity, but you don't have to, right? If you go on here, I linked a couple of other things, and you can, here we go. So in order to kind of frame it around not that Big History website, but one of the things that would be useful is to looking at the table of contents of some of these big history books. This one is from one of the foundational texts in Big History. It's called Maps of Time. It's this giant book. But we have an online version of it through the school library. That's what I linked in here. And the reason why this might be useful, I think they forced me to change my password. So excuse me while I change that. Otherwise, it never doesn't let me log on. But use the table of contents, right? I'm not suggesting you read the entire book because this book is giant. I forgot to bring it out, but it's super thick. But looking at the table of contents can help you frame an activity, right? And figure out, okay, if I want to do an activity on this topic, where in the big history timeline does it fit? Right. So this one, the way this frames it, it actually reduces a lot of that history that doesn't involve humans into one unit, one part, and then focuses more on the history of humanity. Right. That because some of you will be more interested in this, I wanted you to see that you can use the table of contents to frame your own activity, so it doesn't get too scary. The other one I linked in here, let's see, is This Fleeting World. For anybody that actually is really interested in big history, I really recommend this book because it's a really short book that focuses just on how does one teach big history in the absolute like shortest way possible. So it gives you a lot of content in here with a lot of activities as well. And you can see this is all just focusing on the human part of a big history. But this book, if anybody is actually interested in the actual teaching of big history, I really, really recommend it. It's super thin, but it gives you just the content, just basic information with a lot of like activities and how to use this book to teach big history. If we were in person, I would have probably made you buy this book, but just using its table of contents, using what's available for free on the Google Book, I think might help you if you're more interested in that section of big history. So let me see. Let me double check and make sure there's anything big that I'm missing to touch on with you all. Oh, I also linked in here my syllabus. So I told you I've taught this class, the big history class, twice, and I've done like 3 different sections of it. So for anybody that was interested in seeing how I framed my big history class, and if that might help jog ideas of how to create an activity that would fit into a big history class. You can take a look at it. There's things that looking back I would change that I know like didn't work quite well the last time that I taught this course. Like for example, the reading that I chose was the Cynthia Stokes Brown book that I ended up not liking as much, and I would totally just scratch that one off, I think. But you can see like we did reflection papers that semester, and a lot of these PDFs that I have on here are PDFs from that big history website. So you can see that I actually did use that website quite a bit, actually. Mostly this reading. But anyway, so it's just another tool if it interests you. I thought I would model sharing teaching materials because I'm having you develop those. What questions do you have?
I was wondering if we wanted to do something outside of like the scope of civilization and agriculture. One idea that I had was like when teaching the how Earth was formed, I forget the name of the theory, but basically the theory where Earth was bombarded with all these different rocks and it came together, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm trying to remember from like a year ago, but I was wondering if we could have like kids do diagrams. I'm also wondering if this idea has to be like just on the online space, because if it were in person, it would be fun to have them like, it depends on the grade level, but like have them do Play-Doh replicas and like have them model the whole process with like Play-Doh and like toothpicks. I don't know if that's like too childish.
No, in fact, I have a book that I use, and I wasn't going to mention it, but this is bigger, and it basically comes up with lesson plans for every threshold. So it's called Teaching Big History, and they have a lot of that kind of activities in there. So I think it's perfect. And yeah, I think the using the website, it tends to lean more towards the online space, but no, you can absolutely come up with a kind of in-person activity that would involve them creating something or going out and looking for something. Um, Plato's fun, like even looking at rocks,
Yeah.
right? Things like that is a really good for that geology section of it. Um, Even like using balloons and different things to demonstrate different scientific ideas.
Yeah, or even like with the atom. I know sometimes it's difficult to envision how much power an atom has, but like maybe looking at different like nuclear accidents like at Chernobyl to show them like this is how like much just like particle collision can cause and stuff like that would like and just imagine that on a greater scope like happening in the universe and things like that. Would that also be okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. I have to tell you, last year I became obsessed with Chernobyl and like reading as much as I could get my hands on Chernobyl. And that history is really interesting, and it brings together a lot of both scientific and more humanist topics.
Yeah, Chernobyl is insane, but it's
And
insane.
and I don't recommend going on the Chernobyl like rabbit hole because it's a really depressing one unless you're like mentally like prepared for like the story is just a terrible story all around. And for those of you that don't know, they don't have a permanent solution to the accident yet. They were trying these different ideas in there, but it's still all temporary. The last thing they tried didn't work, so
So it's still gonna be contaminated for like the half life of the what is it, uranium? Was it uranium they were using?
I don't remember, but yeah, it's still like it within. It's gonna like it's never going to go away because they haven't figured out a way to make it go away. The things that they're trying is just containment, how to contain all of that material and contain it to just the site of the Chernobyl accident. Um, yeah, like without getting all into it, but what I learned in researching that is that all of the things that they're doing right now are just temporary, and they're actually like the last thing they tried was only going to last for like 100 years. So in 100 years, they have to come up with something else that will contain that all that nuclear material there. Great. Now I'm ending in a terrible note.
I'm sorry.
No, it was my fault for going off with the Chernobyl thing. I was like, I was like, I got really into it, but it's really depressing story. um, any other ideas anybody is thinking of? Hopefully, at least today, we got some ideas jogging in your brain. Yes, no. All right, who has an idea or several ideas they can think of for this activity?
I kind of got a little bit inspired by the whole food agriculture. I think that'd be a really cool like agriculture and civilization, like maize and corn, and how like maize was made, you know, like originated in Mexico. And I want to kind of talk about how it was exported to like North America and further, and then talk about like today how corn is used, like how widely corn is used for things that we don't even know, things that we would never expect it to be in. So I kind of want to use something from the past, something now, and involve that or include that in the whole agriculture and civilization aspect.
Something like that is perfect, and like everybody can do a different like food element.
The banana one was really cool too. We were talking in one of my older classes, like the whole banana republic, U.S. imperialism, like that one is like, but that I feel can get into more history side as opposed to like specific history, you know.
Yeah, which is okay, but yeah, if you if the
It's a
idea of using something like maíz, yeah, because you can do fun stuff with it. Like I've always wanted to do something with the tomato, and because the tomato came from the Americas, but a lot of us associate it with like pizza, and you can do a whole like history of the pizza, and about how that can only exist with the integration of the Americans into the rest of the global economy. But anyway, I'm not coming up with the activity, you all are. But okay, raise your hand if you've got some ideas you can work off of after today. Only two, three? All right, I will stop.